My friends, apparently game publishers just seem to be one-upping each other since however many weeks it's been, with all these different industries just trying to make bad move after bad move, whether if it's for us, the consumers, or for the developers. I mean, we started off with, what's it called? Escape from Tarkov, where they tried pulling a fast one by making people pay $250 for a DLC that they said would be free for people who, like, paid for a certain package and all that. And then we had PlayStation trying to force PC players to get a PSN account, and ended up ruining the experience for a lot of people, not just in places where they could make PSN accounts, but for people where PSN accounts aren't available, and how that entire fiasco went, even though it's been overturned. And then yesterday, an article came out about how Xbox is in turmoil because they keep shutting down studios, whether if it was Arcane Austin, the people who made Redfall, which nobody really cares about, but even some of the publishers or the developers that made Hi-Fi Rush, a game that has been accredited and awarded for how well of a game it is, and yet that industry is also being closed. And then we have earlier today about EA again pushing generative AI. So I've already talked about the PSN stuff in a couple of videos in the past, and then Tarkov is kind of old news. So why don't we talk about some of like the closing of the doors of the developing studios that Xbox is doing in some detail, and I'll keep it short because I do gotta go. That's why I'm not wearing a hat. But long story short, the reason why they're closing down a lot of these studios, regardless of their success in recent times, is because they're not making enough money. And then you're probably asking yourself, well, Hi-Fi Rush was a very, awarded game. It's highly rated. How can they not be making any money? And it's not that people aren't paying for the game. It's that they're not paying enough for the game, because instead of paying for the game outright, they're opting into using Game Pass, which is a significantly cheaper source of monthly, essentially, subscriptions to play whatever games you want on the Xbox service. But because you're not paying the full price, the industry is not getting enough money to keep themselves afloat. And because a lot of these games are available on Xbox Game Pass, if you are not a big studio like Bethesda, you're going to get the axe, regardless of how successful you are. So, unfortunately, because you're not paying full price for the game, you're not keeping the development studio afloat. It's on you, I guess, according to Microsoft, even though it shouldn't be, because Microsoft makes enough money anyway. They should be able to fund these studios, but they're not, because they're not making their money's worth because people aren't paying for the game in full. They're rather opting into Game Pass. Now, the next issue is EA with generative AI. Now, I don't want to say that this is news, because I already covered this. I covered this a while ago. I don't exactly know how long, and I'll put a link to that video somewhere where I go into deep detail about how Andrew Wilson, the guy who is spearheading this generative AI stuff, in terms of like what they use it for and all that, was pretty much essentially saying that we can use AI to make games faster. Not just make games faster, but even make people who play the games make content for these games using these materials, using these tools. And they said that in the wake of having laid off hundreds of people already. So it kind of leaves a sour taste in the mouth, at least back then. They already laid off a bunch of people, and then they come out saying, we're going to be using generative AI. We've already been, but we want to ramp up how often we use it. And then they come back again, pretty much emboldening their statement, saying, we want to have more generative AI in our games because they are useful. Now, as somebody who works in the field of artificial intelligence, I really like the fact that AI is helpful in a lot of ways. But when it comes to replacing people's jobs, it's an issue. It is an issue. And because what can you do with the people once you're done with them? Once you replace their jobs, with something that can make the same content as they can, maybe not as good as them, and then you have somebody else who touches things up here and there, but all those people now lost their jobs. You're laying off even more people because you're putting a short-term investment into AI for long-term money gain, because now you're putting it on to the AI to make this content and then have developers do whatever else they want to use. And then other people who are the players can also make content too. So you're essentially just farming money at that point. You're literally employing the people who are paying for your game to make the game for you. And it's stupid, in my opinion. But again, it's companies just making very strange or bad decisions. Companies have to make their money anyway because they need to make the money to be able to fund these developing studios. But if they're not making enough, whether if it's through something like Game Pass, or if they're not making enough because they're not getting their metrics because they're not making accounts, people aren't making their accounts, or if they feel like they are spending too much money on people, so they start cutting out, laying off the workforce, or it's completely cutting out the developing studio, they're going to find ways to make money to keep themselves afloat while sacrificing the people underneath, or even going after the player base, whether if it's making accounts or forcing people to pay $250 for a DLC that was said to be free. Now, whether if you believe in all of these methods that they're trying to do, one thing is for certain. The customer and the developers should not be the ones with the gun to the back of their head. The companies have to make their money, no questions asked, or else we wouldn't be able to have these developing studios or these games if the developing studio wants to partner with these publishers, because of course they're big names. Who doesn't want to be on Xbox? Who doesn't want to be on PlayStation? But once you start putting yourselves in this industry and you start seeing how little money that you're going to be making because of the services that they provide, then you're kind of shit out of luck. You're going to eventually get the axe, regardless if you make a good game or not. So it's almost incentivizing to have independence, to be your own thing. I mean, look at like Hades 2, where they're already making such great success, and they're not fully restricted behind all the things that PlayStation has, even though it's available on their console. They're doing a great job. But yet there are other industries that do have these exclusive rights, like Hi-Fi Rush, where even though they are successful, because the platform that they're on hinders them from making any money because there are services that prevent them from getting the full price without the need of sale, then they get hurt. Because then Daddy Xbox is going to say, you're not making enough money, I have to cut you, regardless of how good your game is. And even if your game is bad, like with Redfall, then it's even worse, because now they're going to put that sting on you and have a legitimate excuse to let you go. You're not making us enough money because your game is bad. I'm sorry, you weren't able to successfully produce this game. And then you come into the other aspect where the developers are losing their jobs because they're being replaced by generative AI, and how you have people that are in charge that are happy, excited, exhilarated by using these materials because it's going to save them money and mass produce more games. And if there's anything that we know about products and all that stuff, quality is better than quantity. And if EA is going to be doing everything they can to produce as many games as they can using generative AI, there's going to be a good chance that these games aren't going to be as good, regardless of what they use it for. Again, I go into more detail in that video, so go check it out if you want. But at the end of the day, look, as consumers, as gamers, and all across the board, we have, unfortunately, more power than the developers, because we can choose not to buy a game. And if we do have a game and they end up screwing us over, like in Sony's case with Helldivers 2, we have the right to not play the game anymore, try to refund it, or try to make changes. And we've done so successfully with Helldivers 2. We haven't done so successfully with The Crew, unfortunately, but there are cases where we do have some power over these publishers. But when it comes to the developers, there's a bit more of an issue, because if they are dependent on these big publishing companies like Sony and Microsoft, then they are at their mercy. And if they aren't making enough money off of their game, they could get cut. just as we've seen with Microsoft's case. And it doesn't matter either if they are still in there, because now that this technology is starting to rise about artificial intelligence and how they can create these systems for us, then they might as well go and purchase this material. They're going to go out of their way, especially in EA's case, and essentially replace the workforce. And with that replacement of the workforce, now we have a bunch of people who are jobless, who had a set of skills while creating these video games and have subsequently been replaced. And if you don't think it's happening, then you're kidding yourself. Because like I said, EA has already laid off a bunch of people, and it's speculated that it is due to the use of generative AI. And so long as they are going to continue to bolster the use of it and find more ways to use it, more people are going to lose their jobs. And that's where their power is kind of weaker, because they don't have means and safeguards to keep them from losing their jobs. They don't have unions that can ensure that they aren't going to lose their money and that they're not going to lose their skill set. This is an ever-changing environment, and so long as we have systems in place that can do jobs that a person spent years to master within an instant, they're at danger, as are our games, as is the industry as a whole. And that's pretty much it. And that's all I wanted to talk about today. If you like this kind of stuff, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want more things like this. I will catch all of y'all later. Peace.